All right, the strength training strategy that no one is ever taught. At the very least, most people are certainly never taught this strategy. And it usually comes off as sounding a little bit underwhelming at first when you first hear about it, but it is absolutely profound in its impact. And this does not have to do with your technique. This does not have to do with your cueing. It does not have to do with your volume, with your intensity, with your loads, your sets, your reps, all that. Although in a sense, it has everything to do with your volume and intensity. And this is the concept of keeping a training log. We're going to cover briefly 6 important points about why to keep a training log and how to keep a training log. We've got other videos that go more in depth into how to keep a training log, and we'll link to them below as well as right up here. But let's get to these 6 points in a relatively quick fashion. First off, let's get to a couple reasons why. So point number 1, a training log is what separates exercise from training. Now, there's nothing wrong with exercise. Exercise is far, far better than nothing, but exercise is what you do when you want to get hot, you want to get sweaty, you want to feel like you've accomplished something. Training is what you're doing, what you do when you want to actually accomplish something. With training, there is a goal. With that goal, there needs to be a plan, there needs to be a program, and with that program, there needs to be data so you can continue to make progress. Your training log is what provides, what records that data. This goes right into reason number 2 to keep a training log. Your data is the impetus for improvement. It's real hard to look at your training log and you discovered that last time you pressed or you benched or you squatted or deadlifted 135 pounds for 5 reps, right? You look at it the next day, you come into the gym, you did this on Monday, you come in on Wednesday. It's real hard to look at that 135 by 5 by 3 and then go and do that again, right? You look at it and you're like, well, I can't be a pansy, I've got to do more than that. So this is the impetus for improvement. It makes it so that you're not the casual guy or that casual gal just showing up to the gym, just kind of doing random stuff. What will I do today? I think I'll bench press. What will I bench press? I did 135, a couple weeks ago, I'll do 135 again, right? No, you've got that recent data and that's the driver to drive you forward. Point number 3, what kind of training log do you want to keep? I would recommend, this is really the argument between paper and digital. And by the way, this is not an argument that is like worth having in the YouTube comments. I would argue that there is no argument ever worth having in the YouTube comments, but that's a separate point. It's the argument between paper and digital. I would recommend a paper training log in either pen or pencil. You can certainly use a digital one. You want to use Excel or Google Sheets or Notes or Evernote or whatever you want to use. You can also certainly use an app, but I'm going to point out that when you're using an app specifically, there is no guarantee that that app will be around forever. So if that app disappears, you either lose all that data or you've got to transfer that data over to something else. Now, as far as a digital training log, something like a spreadsheet or something like that, perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. Some of you will do great with that. It can be a great idea. However, in my experience as a lifter and especially as a coach, which is considerable, I've found that generally people just don't record as much useful information when they're doing it in digital format. They're not as likely to record things like cues and notes about other factors that may have influenced training and a note for next time, what they want to do for their next training session and stuff like that. So I would recommend this wonderful technology called paper and pen. So get yourself a notebook. It can be a composition notebook. You can have a binder, I guess, if you really want to. I've definitely gone down that road in a previous lifetime. But just a composition notebook or something like that, paper and pen, it's a great way to keep a training log. Point number 4, let's talk about what to record. Now, I'm not talking about the day and the date. Yes, you want to record the day and the date. So if it's Monday, the 22nd of September, that's when we're recording this right now, I'd recommend that you write that. Or it's Wednesday, the 24th or whatever. So when you look back at a previous session, you know when that session happened. You know when you pressed 140 pounds for 5 sets of 5 or something like that. But beyond that, there's really 4 things that I would recommend that you put in there. I'd recommend that you put in the prescription for the day. So if you're squatting and you're supposed to squat 3 sets of 5, write that down, right? Squat and then write 3 by 5. Then I would recommend you write down the warm-up sets. Over time, as you become a more experienced lifter and your warm-ups change relatively little from session to session, you may decide not to write down your warm-up sets. I would probably still recommend you at least write down your last warm-up. But that's entirely up to you. It is your training log. So far you've got the prescription, you've got the warm-up sets, the work sets. So if the work sets for that day were you're supposed to squat 225 pounds by 5 by 3, in other words, 225 pounds by 5 reps by 3 sets, write that down, of course, in your book. And then also, component number 4, write down what you're supposed to do next. So I squatted 225 today, I'm supposed to squat 230 next, or maybe I'm supposed to have a light squat next, and I'm not supposed to squat 230 until Friday, something like that. Write down those notes. So your prescription, your warm-ups, your work sets, and what's next. Point number 5, besides those basic items, what else should you record? I would recommend probably 3 things. Write down the cues that you were using or should be using for next time. Maybe you forgot to get tight, you forgot to breathe properly before you started a rep. Remind yourself to take a breath, brace hard, get tight, Valsalva, whatever that appropriate cue is going to be. So cues are going to be useful. Any other notes that are going to be useful? Maybe you forgot to use your belt, or you have a note that you're going to start using a belt next time, or you want to write yourself a note to, set up at a different hole height on the rack because you had your J-hooks too high or too low or something like that. It's just random notes. Maybe you just felt lousy that day. You're coming off a flu or something like that, so you had to take the weight down because you had been sick the previous day, something like that. All right, so general notes are also useful. And then I would also recommend have a page where you keep track of your PRs. Have it at the front of your book or at the end of your book, or a separate piece of paper that you put into a pocket if you've got a notebook that's got some pockets. But cues, general notes, and PRs, all useful things to have in your training log. Lastly, point number 6, just general structure, and really just a really basic point here. My recommendation would be 1 week per page. So if you're training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, if you're doing a 4-day split like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever it is, you can fit if you write in a neat fashion. And by the way, if you don't write in a neat fashion, this might be a good reason to keep a digital training log. Some of you have handwriting that would make a 4-year-old blush. I know, I have a 4-year-old. So you need to be able to read your own handwriting, all right? But if you can read your own handwriting and you can write in a semi-legible fashion, you can fit easily 3 days worth of training, maybe 4 days, maybe 5 days, I do this on a regular basis, onto 1 page. If you have a week that's short, let's say you train Monday and Wednesday, and then later in the week you're traveling, you didn't get in Friday's training, or you got sick, or something happened, the kid got sick, whatever, then the next week, don't put Monday at the bottom. This would be my recommendation anyway. When you start the new week, even if the previous week was kind of incomplete, just start a new page when you get on to the next week anyway. You'll generally find it a better way to organize things. You will be able to find previous sessions better that way. As always, we hope these tips help you get stronger and live better.